finance house. And so they're changing actually the very language that we use. And what that actually does is it actually says, oh, we have to actually question what a bank is. You know, start thinking, well, if we're going to do something that doesn't have riba, doesn't have interest, we're going to actually have to think about, well, can you have a bank that doesn't have interest? Or do you have to call it something else? Do you have to sort of change the language that you're using? And by changing the language, by calling it a finance house, they're actually challenging the ways in which we think about finance itself. So, you know, maybe we need to stop calling them banks. If they're Islamic, they're not Islamic banks, they're Islamic finance houses, or Islamic financial institutions is a term I use in my work. But the language that we use often informs the way in which we think about finance and the way in which we think about banking and the assumptions that we make, right? So if you're a bank, does that mean that you have to be based on interest? Does that necessarily imply interest? My interpretation of what the Kuwait Finance House is doing is they're actually problematizing the very word, the very concept of banking by saying, no, we're not a bank, we're a finance house. That's something else. That's something different. It's working on a different kind of logic, if you will. So you see this is in KL Central, this massive train station, right? These trains move in and out, and Al-Rajhi has their ads up on one side of the station, then down the tracks south of the station. Then on the other side of the station you have Asian Finance Bank, which is mainly Qatari owned, a lot of Qatari investment that you see their ads as well. And these were actually part of a concerted effort. After Malaysia had succeeded in setting up this national Islamic financial industry, they said, now it's time to go global, to make this international. And part of that was, being the New York of the Muslim world didn't mean being just the New York, the big node within the nation, but the big node globally. And in order to do that, you had to bring in these other institutions from the Middle East, from the Gulf, and elsewhere. So the Asian Finance Bank is part of QIB, which is from Qatar. Al-Rajhi is from Saudi Arabia. Kuwait Finance House, obviously from Kuwait, right? So this is part of creating this New York of the Muslim world, right? This global hub for Islamic finance. But it's not just banking, right? One of the things that the Malaysians were very smart about was they realized, well, there's actually a lot we don't know. We often think about, we live in modern times, we often fool ourselves into thinking that we figured everything out. My sense, after having been around for doing qualitative social scientific research for 20 years, we actually know a lot less than we think we know. We actually know a lot less than we think we know. We think we know a lot, but we actually don't know that much. And the Malaysians were very smart because what they realized is there are a lot of things we actually don't know about Islamic finance. We actually don't understand it that well. We don't, we have some ideas of how it might work. We have some guidelines from the Quran. We have some guidelines from the Sunnah. But what's that going to look like in practice? How is it going to actually fit? How's it going to make sense? So what they did is they said they didn't just try to start banks. They didn't just start insurance companies. They said we're going to have to start universities. We're going to have to start think tanks. We're going to have to start research institutions. Well, why do you think they wanted to do that? Why do you need a university dedicated to Islamic finance?
To have the human resources.
Sorry?
To have the human resources, the basis, the foundation, intellectual foundation.
Yeah,
resources.
Absolutely. Right? You need the knowledge. You need to create the knowledge. Yeah.
You need to create a complete system that works for everybody.
Yeah, so the knowledge isn't just there. People have to come up and actually figure out, well, how's this actually going to work? What's it going to look like? And the idea is that, finance isn't something that stands still. Even in the modern world, financial in the conventional world, sorry, I shouldn't have used that term. In the conventional world, finance doesn't stand still, right? It's changing all the time. It's sometimes it's changing in really destructive ways, as Brother Rehan described, right? They're creating these, mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, all the credit default swaps, all these things that brought about the financial crisis back in 2008 are, those are financial innovations. Some of them are really negative and have disastrous effects, but some are really positive, right? And so finance is changing all the time, and the Malaysian state recognized that Islamic finance was going to have to evolve, it was going to have to develop, it was going to have to change, right? That we could take principles from the past, but we're going to have to figure out how to make those operational in the present and work in the future. So this is a research university that I did fieldwork at, that I did research at. It's called INCIEF. That's a abbreviation for the International Center for Education in Islamic Finance. Really exciting. For those of you that are interested in pursuing maybe degrees in Islamic finance, this is one of the best places to go in the world today. It's got some of the leading experts. They're doing really fascinating, creative, innovative work on Islamic finance. So I was a research affiliate here. The Malaysian state spent, I think, something like $200 million to set up this university, and also a research institute called ISRA, the International Sharia Research Academy for Islamic finance. And ISRA is sort of the sister institution to this one, INCIEF, and they're more of a think tank, trying to figure out what Islamic finance is going to be. They're doing a lot of research in kind of applied Sharia and thinking about how you bring various injunctions or statements from the Quran, from the Sunnah, and how do you actually operationalize those? How do you put those into practice? So the other thing that they did is, I was talking about this earlier with some of the colleagues here. They opened up this institution called the Islamic Financial Services Board. I think this is in the mid-2000s, around 2003 or something like that. Still under the former Prime Minister Mahathir. There had been a group in Bahrain called AOFI. You're going to have to help me, Brother Rehan, with the abbreviation. It's the... Do you remember what the abbreviation is?
Auditor and Accounting Organization of Islamic Finance.
Yeah, so it's basically a global institution that was supposed to set down Sharia and fiqh standards for Islamic finance. Really well-known Sharia board. Some of the top Islamic scholars in the world are working for AOFI. That's in Bahrain. But there was a recognition in the late 90s that there wasn't any kind of institution that was dedicated toward what the banking standards would look like in Islamic finance. And so they set up this thing called the Islamic Financial Services Board, the IFSB. And Mahathir lobbied the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, to bring the IFSB to Malaysia. Malaysia, again, made a massive investment in order to host it. And the idea was that they needed something that was analogous to the Basel Committee for Islamic finance. The Basel Committee is in Switzerland and sets down the global standards for conventional banking. The idea was that you needed something analogous for Islamic finance. You needed something analogous that would address the kind of, well, what are the banking standards for Islamic finance going to be globally? As we try to, set up these international networks, these global networks, you need something like that. So they set this up. This is in one of the central bank buildings in central Kuala Lumpur. Very beautiful building. Let's see. Here's another shot of what the IFSB looks like from the outside. Really spectacular. If you ever have a chance to go to Malaysia, I really recommend this. They have an excellent money museum in the ground floor. The whole history of money, and some of the questions about money. And then there's this real dynamism in Malaysia today. A lot of energy trying to think about, well, what is the hub going to look like? What is the central hub going to look like? They really don't think of KL as the only hub. They're thinking of it in relation to Bahrain, to Dubai, to Istanbul, right? That there'll be a network of hubs and a distinct international Islamic financial system that operates in parallel and alongside the global financial system. So just as you have a kind of global network now of New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Frankfurt, you'll have KL, Dubai, Manama, Istanbul, or some configuration thereof of this kind of international parallel global financial network. So that was all very exciting to me when I went over to Malaysia and I encountered this, you know, and all this energy and these people thinking about it. But the question then became, well, what exactly is Islamic finance? To kind of come back to